It's a great honor to be here, and I feel very happy to talk in front. I'm also slightly intimidated. As a journalist, it's usually me asking the questions from the experts, not usually me telling the experts about the thing that they really know. So I'm looking forward to the discussion during the day and during this afternoon, and to learn from you all. I'm a journalist and photographer, as I said, Marcus Haraldsson, and I want to bring us back 35 years in time to the spring of 1989 and to Dalsland, west coast Sweden. This is a total rural area. This is my whole school. I'm sitting in the front. My mom was my teacher, or our teacher. She's standing at the back, Monica. And in the spring of 1989, the world looked like this, or this is Europe, but the world was totally affected by the Cold War. It was dark, could have gone dark, because we were all looking at the nuclear power things that happened. Is it coming back, or should I just keep?
Well, I'm trying to fix it. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
For some reason.
Okay. Well, it was a very different world back then. The Cold War split Europe in two, split Asia, Africa, Latin America in two different parts. It was the Soviet Union on one side and the US and the West on the other side. And then, as you may remember, but it changed in the spring of 1989, and then in the early fall of 1989, everything changed. And on November 9, the Berlin Wall came down, the very symbol of the Cold War. And it had been revolutions in pretty much all of the Eastern European countries, as you can see here. Wow, peoply revolutions involving regular people going out and protesting to authoritarian dictatorships. And after the fall of the Berlin Wall, after the very symbol of the Cold War had ended, people could some political scientists even mentioned that it was the end of history. That capitalism, democracy, and individualism had won, and now we were looking at a green-pink future with prosperity. And growing up in this time, as with my mom as the teacher and in this little school, we could see the world, and we could see that we could bring change to it. At this time also, world leaders, when they did not talk about or worry so much about the nuclear threat, they could start looking at other pictures. The New York Times had a whole front page in 1988 about the global warming, when NASA just declared that the heating in the world was 99% certain, caused by raised emissions of carbon dioxide. And in Sweden, there was an environmental election when 75% of the electorate voted the environment as the most important issue in the elections of 1988. Every party, the Green Party entered parliament, but every party was a Green Party. And in my school, at least it became a little quiet now. In my school, back in Dalsland, we were very engaged, and we started to write a magazine about the local and tying the global and local issues. I was 10 years old, and we sent this magazine into a competition. We won a football field-sized chunk of rainforest over in a tiny country in Central America called Costa Rica. Costa Rica was the most fastest deforesting country per capita in the world. That gone from, in 1940, 75% of the country was covered by dense tropical forests. In 1987, just about 20% of the country was covered. It was a complete meltdown of the tropical forests there, caused by the development strategy of the country that was successful to cutting down the forest and grow coffee, bananas, sugar, and primarily beef that went on export to the United States. Are we hoping to get the picture, or yeah?
I think is that we can have it online, but it's some issue with the device here in the room.
Okay.
So I'm really sorry, but I'm trying to fix it, and I have never seen it before.
All right.
Sorry.
So I'll just
So we
talk.
all go online, then it works.
Okay, if everyone goes online, no problems with the Wi-Fi. Okay, okay, I'll just keep it. It's fantastic pictures, by the way. Amazing photography. Where was I? So we were in. We sent these magazines. We won a soccer field. Costa Rica was fast losing its forests, and this was became part of a campaign called the Children's Rainforest. And by the time we came in the fall of 1989, it had already been brewing for a couple of years. It started in a school in Sorunda, south of Stockholm, and then it quickly spread. It spread throughout Sweden. Over 4,000 schools were involved in Sweden. Hundreds of thousands of children, tens of millions of kronas were collected to this tiny little mountain in Costa Rica, and it spread beyond Sweden. It spread to the UK, to Germany, to the US, to Australia, even to Brazil, and India was along. And a couple of years into this project, the organizers from Sorunda, Eha, the teacher, and Roland, one of the students, got the Goldman Environmental Prize, which is kind of the Nobel Prize of grassroots organizing. The only Swedes to ever getting that prize. And then the world press started writing. National Geographic had an editorial about the Children's Rainforest. The New York Times, Time, Life magazine, they were superstars. And at this time, the organizers in tiny Sorunda, they got some offers that they could not refuse or believe they couldn't. They were offered by FINA, a global oil company, their Norwegian branch, to get sponsorship from this oil company. So FINA was having a wide campaign in all the petrol stations in Norway, over 300 of them, where you could fill up your tank with petrol, and then you got 8 square meters of rainforest in Costa Rica protected. Okay.
Yes, if you would like to take a break 5 minutes.
And then we'll fix the pictures?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that could be because Marcus is a photographer, so there are.
It's easier to say that the pictures are great if they can't see them. Okay, so we're leaving off with the Children's Rainforest. They've just gotten their oil money from the Norwegian FINA grant. They're on top of the world, and they're meeting the Secretary General of the United Nations.
You try to see your photos. I don't know.
Okay, so how long break do we need? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? Should we take 5 minutes?
5 minutes.
5 minutes break, and then we'll be back.
5 minutes. So in case you need water.
That's where we lost signal.
This is where we lost signal. Okay, I'm gonna spare you the whole retake of the same story, but I'm gonna flip through the pictures and then just do a speed catch up. The Berlin Wall came down. It was the Cold War, the Iron Curtain. The Berlin Wall came down. People talked about the end of history. Political scientists, Francis Fukuyama, global leaders started talking about global warming. And in Sweden, it was the environmental election. Everybody thought that the environment was the most important thing that we could work with. Me and my friends started writing this magazine. We won a soccer field of rainforest, football field of rainforest in Costa Rica. Costa Rica has gone through a massive decline in forestation due to their development strategy that said that they should chop down the rainforest to grow agriculture. It was a project that had become viral very quickly from 1987 onwards, where it spread from Sorunda, south of Stockholm, to the UK, to Japan, to the United Nations. Here, Eha Kern, the little school teacher in Sorunda, stands next to the Secretary General of the UN, and Roland Tiensu, the kid that started the whole thing, stands over there. They got some global serious attention and sponsorship by FINA, the Norwegian oil company that did these giant ads where you could save 8 square meters of rainforest by filling your tank. And then we come to this. We're back now to my school situation in Dalsland. This is my mother, Monica. I was living this project. Me and my friends, we were doing theatrical pieces. We sold cinnamon buns. We sold our magazines to get money to the rainforest, and all of these hundreds of thousands of other kids did that. And it was on the coffee filters. It was on the petrol stations, it was everywhere. My mom, she'd been doing some studies and she was a little like, is this real? Like, this doesn't seem fully plausible that we just send off the money to Costa Rica and they'll fix it. Somebody's got to live in that forest. It's got to be more complicated. So she ended up taking the household money. We'd never been to Latin America, spoke no Spanish, and investigative team of my middle school teacher mom and me, 12 years old, went to Costa Rica to see if there was a forest. We found a forest. It's not exactly the children's rainforest, but it's an adjacent reserve. And we sat down with my biggest life superhero, Jim Crisp, who was the American that was in charge of the children's rainforest. And he confirmed mom's worries. He had no illusions that this was a simple task. He had extreme demands from Swedish kids and oil companies to produce maps that was growing by every month. But nobody knew any about who owned the forest, and it was super complicated. And he said that he had no idea if they were succeeding and that we needed to come back in a generation or two to see if there was a children's rainforest. That's where mom's careful notes stopped in the meeting with Jim Crisp. So, one generation later, I grew up, apparently, I became a journalist. I always felt when looking back at this whole banana story that it felt a little childish and naive and naively hopeful to work with the tropical rainforest. And also it was some icky colonial little blonde kids sending money to buy land on the other side of the world. But nevertheless, a couple of years ago, I found this, or mom gave me this binder with her careful notes and the notes from Jim Crisp, and I felt the need to go back and check on this story, what had happened with the children's rainforest. So it became a long-form series of reportage for a magazine called Filter a couple of years ago, and in the book that came last year, The Children Who Wanted to Save the World. And for this project, I, of course, had to go back to try and trace as much as possible of the viral campaign and to the forest back in Costa Rica. I met with my close childhood friends. We sat down on the lawn back in my cottage in Dalsland, and we remembered very well this time and age when the history was over and 10-year-old kids could believe that we could really do a change. We could bring down the walls. We could make something happen in the world. But now, when objectively speaking, we're middle-aged guys with much more resources, we're on boards, we have money and contacts, and now we believed in nothing, that nothing was possible. And my friends, even more, particularly Daniel, he had a very dark picture of the world just in a couple of short years, just going down, descending into a big fireball. And it was a similar super non-hope that came from a lot of the other former kids that I re-met from this project. Of course, I had to go back. I went back to Costa Rica a couple of times, stayed for a couple of months in a couple of different iterations. This is Gerardo Céspedes. He was one of the first park guards in what is now the Children's Rainforest Reserve up in the Tilarán Mountains in northwestern Costa Rica. And he did a lot of negotiations on Jim Crisp's behalf in the late 1980s and 1990s. And he was also the whistleblower for a lot of the corruption that inevitably happened in Costa Rica. There was corruption in Sweden too. A lot of money went sideways in the Swedish organizers. But in Costa Rica, there was a lot of issues, primarily dealing with these maps that had to be upgraded quickly for our concerns back in Sweden. Because prior to this, forests in Costa Rica had no value. That land where there was trees was worthless. Land did only get value if you chop down the trees and grew something on them. So now when we came in and wanted to pay money for standing trees, nobody knew who owned that land until it became important. And then the land surveyor that was drawing the ownership maps, he became in a sweet spot for getting bribes. And he was very liberal with his drawing of maps. So some of these spots are bought like twice or thrice or quadruple times. And then there was violent gun shootings out in the forest and a lot of stuff. here is an image. There was also social concerns. Here is in the local village of La Tigra, where the men in the village have gotten the rifle from the policeman to go out to shoot what they thought was the last jaguar on this mountain. And they thought that these kids over in Sweden going through some American middlemen was just a conspiracy theory to make their lives miserable if they were going to have to live with all these poisonous animals. These corruption stories and social concerns and all of that was expected to find when looking into coming back on a story and doing an investigation about what happened. What I had not really expected to find so thoroughly was this, that the forests that I had visited as a 12-year-old not only stood there, but they were much bigger, much healthier than what they were when I was there 35 years ago as a kid. Costa Rica in the late 1980s had around about 20% forest cover. A couple of years ago, it was almost tripled the size in forests. Jaguars are now often caught in the surveillance cameras by the researchers up in Monteverde. And this is a golden spotted rain frog. It's one of the dozen of species of frogs that were thought to be extinct, that had disappeared in what was called the frog apocalypse, that took hundreds of species of frogs around the world and dozens of species in Monteverde. But as time has gone by and the forests have been big, and then some of this little fellow was not extinct. He started to come back again and reclaiming the areas where they once were, or finding new spaces. So biodiversity is also somewhat coming back. So then the question is, like, was it us kids that did this? Like, was it today soccer playing kids in the children's rainforest on the football field? Was it us? Well, we had some little part to do with something. The children's rainforest is today the biggest private reserve in Costa Rica. So that is not nothing. But the main thing was we had nothing to do with the tripling of forest cover in Costa Rica, of course. That happened on a whole different level, and it happened much earlier than we came around. Or a couple of years earlier, in 1986, the government where Alvaro Umana was the environmental minister, he and his team, and under Oscar Arias, that went against a massive economical downturn, wars in pretty much all of the neighboring countries, massive international pressure. They went for long-term economic success, where they realized that if we chop down the last tree, it's bad news. We're not going to have an economy. So Alvaro, he became the head of Miranem, which was the environmental ministry that was on top of the Ministry of Energy and the Ministry of Mines. The most lucrative ministries was under Alvaro, that was the environmental minister. And then they realized the ecosystem service of reliable rainfall and reliable climate and services that the forests could give. So they introduced a payment for ecosystem services, initially funded through debt for nature swaps through the WWF and the World Bank, but then through a fossil fuel tax from 1996, fossil fuel that went straight into forest protection. It's today the main driver of the finance behind standing forests in Costa Rica. They also expanded the nature reserves dramatically. 25% of the country is protected, about half of that in private reserves and half of it in public reserves. And they also made a massive investment in ecotourism as a way to make forests pay for themselves when they're not chopped down. So the big boom in ecotourism in Costa Rica is partially by design from this time. And also some educational reforms so that kids got an opportunity to be able to be out in nature, and setting up of networks with environmental teachers and the like. This has not only affected the forest cover in Costa Rica, but it's also had an effect globally. This is from the signing of the Paris Agreement in Paris 2015. The United Nations chief negotiator of the Paris Agreement, Christiana Figueres, is like the Jan Eliasson of Costa Rica, the top diplomat in Costa Rica. She's widely credited with getting these 196 governments together for the Paris Agreement. This is the Kunming-Montreal Agreement 2 years ago, and we're 30 by 30, protecting 30% of nature by 2030, where Costa Rica was the chair country of the Coalition for High Ambition. And they've been the most ambitious suggestions to the COPs over the last couple of decades have come from Costa Rica. Now, in the last couple of years, the picture of Costa Rica's foresight and have changed quite a bit. They've had a shift in their priorities and where they put their money and how they work on this. So it's not as golden an example anymore, but a lot of the legacy is of course still there. And I got curious from working these couple of years on the Costa Rica project on the wider picture. And looking, of course, south to the Amazon, over 100 times the size of Costa Rica. Costa Rica is the size of Denmark approximately, so a success story in Costa Rica is nice and all, but it's somewhat small. So what does this mean in the real world? So I got a grant last year to go to Brazil and talking fast here. And see to search for similarities and search for what happened. This is for a newspaper called Dagens Etc., where I wrote about the hope is alive for the Amazon. It was slightly more nuanced than that because, I mean, of course, a lot of what's happening in the Amazon, as you all know, is the deforestation. And that is very similar and the dynamics partially to Costa Rica in the 1980s, largely driven through by beef production and soybeans, of course, but beef for the domestic market, not so much the foreign market. And what does this then mean? So I got the opportunity to go out to a research station called Camp 41. It's the longest running biological research station in the Amazon that has been running since the 1970s, based around forest islands and edges of the forest, where biologists have monitored the change at the edges, in the islands, and in control spaces out in the deep forest since the late 1970s. This was for a magazine called Forskning og Framsteg, a science magazine, the Soldiers of Hope in the Amazon. And I was at a research course for budding researchers and PhD students and some world-class biologists that was along with them. So what did they conclude after these over 40 years of monitoring? That the Amazon, not only at the edges where deforestation has happened, it got dry, the forest, and then it enables it to burn, but also at the control spaces far out into the supposedly untouched forest, things are changing, and they're changing rapidly. And not only in dryness and temperature, but also in like biological aspects, like birds are getting longer wings and smaller bodies and adjusting to climate here, and it's fueling the theory of a tipping point for parts of the Amazon, going from a rainforest to a much drier type of environment. I searched for other links between Costa Rica, and the social aspects are of course there. Everybody knows about Bolsonaro and the policies of him, and new economic attempts to make an economy that is more aligned with having a living forest. But then it was a very striking example that is unavoidable is this, guys. This is Mats and Vedis from the Amazon Fund. They're the top diplomats at the Norwegian embassy, the top climate and forest diplomats at the Norwegian embassy, controlling like $1 billion of funds. They're Norwegians. It brings to mind easily to FINA back in the early 90s, where the Norwegian oil money is really the only real money on the table for forest protection in the Amazon. Of course, these are some of the most knowledgeable people that I've met on the whole trip, but they're struggling with many of the same issues that we were struggling with, and with Children's Rainforest was struggling with, to keep these maps and keep the forms whether it's carbon offsets or whether it's whatever it's called, it's driven by our consumption and our willingness to buy more stuff and offsetting it in other places. So it's hard to come away from like who controls the narrative, who is this done on behalf of. A big difference from Costa Rica is an issue that changed the picture for me when working in Brazil compared to Costa Rica was how the various countries deal with indigenous populations. In Costa Rica, they've done a lot of things right, but on the indigenous front, there is a lot of rightful criticism to how they have dealt with indigenous territories and rights, and it's one of the worst performing areas of Costa Rica. Brazil doesn't have a particularly strong track record either, but things are, and the debate is on a very different level. Here is a group of men from the Munduruku people in Santarém at the Western Pará State University, where they're having a ceremony to start this semester at the university. So they're going to be studying in various courses at the university, but the university pays a lot of attention to not just make these people part of society, but also to adopt the university according to what lessons they may have. So not just learning the Munduruku guys, but to make the university learn from them and from their knowledges. It's an extremely interesting research project within OFOPA, this university, which ties back to another story I made for the Forskning och Framsteg science magazine, a paradigm shift in the view of human history in South America, because the history, as I was taught and as many of us was taught, was that there was small little bands of people in the Amazon working as hunter-gatherers for a couple of thousand years, but with the last couple of decades of archaeological evidence, it seems there was maybe as many people as today in the Amazon living before colonialism. And they lived in big urban centers. It seems they were harvesting the forest. They were, and they did so for much longer time than what is today, what's been previously thought. These remains close to these petroglyphs in Monte Alegre are over 13,000 years old, meaning that history has become 10,000 years older and deeper than previously thought. This is Elivaldo Luz de Castro of the Pintacoya people that feels that his whole being, his pride of himself has changed considerably with these discoveries. So he's tattooed one of the most striking petroglyphs on his arm next to the name of his son. Which brings me to the last story that I'm presenting here today for Sveriges Natur, the Nature Conservancy magazine, the Voices of the Rainforest. This is Jonathan Watts. He's the Guardian rainforest correspondent in Altamira in northern Brazil. He's been working with one of the world's biggest dam projects, the Belo Monte Dam, that was built up until 10 years ago, affecting an enormous area, disastrously expensive. It's been an economic catastrophe. It doesn't make money. It doesn't produce the electricity it should produce, and it's flooded enormous areas, and it put thousands of people that has been displaced. It's a megalith super project that has gone totally bonkers bad. And in this end of the world, as the Juruna people in the village of Miratu call it, has also spurned a return of civil society in Altamira, the closest city, where people are finding strategies. They survived. Those people that survived the Belo Monte Dam are turning this on its head and now finding strategies to work against new projects and finding legal avenues to monitor fish that has gone down here where it's dry, and and gathering, building up their voices. I want to end with this picture of Veslane Joruna. She's a 19-year-old mother of two, living in the Miratu village at the Gran Volta de Xingu. And she's, for the last year, she's been involved in one of Jonathan Watts and his colleagues' journalism programs. So she has been taught how us Western journalists work, how we see stories, how we develop narratives and stuff, and then also built so that the journalists can learn from her and the village's way of telling stories. And then she's been producing podcasts about how they work with other tribes and other people in the forest, and how the Joruna people have also found their own other groups of the same people to gain back their own traditions, gain back their language that has been lost among these people. And she feels that this is the future for her. That's the basis, and this knowledge of themselves and the collaboration is what can make them work to survive. The village is now threatened by a Canadian gold mine that is going to obliterate the whole village if it happens. And I think that's where I want to end, because I started this with us little kids in Sweden 35 years ago, thinking that we could just send money to Costa Rica and fix it that way. It was helpful. It was needed. Our money are needed, but it can't be on our demands. It's got to be on the demands of people like Veslane and her peers and colleagues. That has to define what success looks like and what the future should be like. Thank you.